Hello fellow mutants, welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to talk about what things did the Arrowverse do better than the DCEU movies. So let's give this a read, shall we? The MCU is more successful, but the most of the 2010s and early 2020s, there has actually been two different shared universe franchises based on the DC comics. The Arrowverse TV franchise expanded from humble beginnings on the CW to include a plethora of series across networks and performs while the DC Extended Universe, or the DCEU, film franchise tried to directly emulate the MCU's success. Both franchises are coming to end of sorts, with the Flash TV series, 9th season, serving as a conclusion to the Arrowverse proper, while the cinematic continuity is set to go through a soft reboot, transforming it into James Gunn and Peter Safran's DC's universe. Looking back, although the films had much greater resources at their disposal and reached wider audiences, there are many elements of storytelling and world building that the Arrowverse handled better. Here are just a few. The Arrowverse had a gradual start. In its early days, the Arrowverse stuck close to the blueprint Marvel used while building its own shared universe. The Arrow debuted in 2012. It played a similar role in developing and in its infant franchise as Iron Man did back in 2008. Both projects eased audience into their comic book worlds, initially excluding superpowers in favor of stories of troubled human crime fighting. Throughout Arrow Season 1, there were plenty of references to the comics, and several major faces from throughout the DC pantheon were introduced, though they were all like Oliver Queen, who was played by Stephen Amell. Human fighters, either assassins or vigilantes, not full-blown superheroes or villains. Oliver himself was a ruthless vigilante on a very specific mission, only gradually began to embrace a more widely focused, altruistic brand of crime fighting. Even while rapidly expanding its world, the show kept Oliver's story in the forefront, and this helped draw audiences in and readied them for when the show transitioned into more outlandish comic book shenanigans in Season 2. The second season saw more introduction of the actual superpowers of the show's world, when main cast member Slade Wilson, who was played by Manu Bennett, gained the super soldier's abilities he possessed in the comics, and Barry Allen, who is portrayed as Grant Gustin, being introduced as a guest star in 2-episode storyline that served as a backdoor pilot for The Flash to spin off from. But even then, Arrow continued to introduce these elements gradually with limitations. Barry wasn't introduced until almost halfway through the season, and after being struck by lightning that gave him super speed, he remained off-screen in a coma until The Flash premiered the following year, meaning his abilities weren't shown on Arrow until the crossover between the two series for Arrow Season 3, Flash Season 1. For the remainder of Season 2, the only source of superpowers on Arrow was the Miracoro serum that gave Slade his abilities, and by the end of the season, Slade was played by Manu Bennett, Roy Harper played by Courtney Haynes, and the other characters injected with the serum were cured, losing their powers in the process. After the Flash premiered, both series continued adding more comic book characters and concepts much faster, but this was only possible because of the careful work Arrow did in its early days of establishing a believable, more realistic world. The DCEU began with the Man of Steel, a standalone Superman film that, despite whatever other flaws it might have, does a decent job of introducing the Kryptonian hero to a realistic world. The sequel, however, abandoned the mythological world behind pace and threw viewers into a deep end of DC's mythology. Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice not only brought in Ben Affleck's Dark Knight as first as enemy, and then ally of Henry Cavill's Superman, it also introduced Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, Jason Momoa as Aquaman, was everywhere since before, Ray Fisher as Cyborg, and Ezra Miller as the DCEU's version of the Flash. In addition to the villains like Lex Luthor, played by Jesse Eisenberg, and Doomsday, and a host of new supporting characters. While some of these characters were well adapted, the Affleck and Gadot's work receiving critical praise, introducing them all at once, overwhelmed many viewers. Furthermore, as Aquaman, Cyborg, and Flash were only featured in cameos when the time came for them to unite with Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman in the subsequent Justice League movie, viewers were not as invested as they were when Barry and Oliver teamed up or when the Avengers first assembled. And I'm telling you, I know like most of my viewers now would understand, like whoever like is born after 2012 who might be watching this video, who wasn't around when the Avengers movie was being made or was released, I should say. Oh my lord, that was such a big thing. Guess we had like two Fantastic Four movies before this, but we knew that was the team. And fun fact, Fantastic Four is the first Marvel family, right? But oh my lord, Avengers was such a big deal when it first came out, because we had Iron Man, Hulk, Thor, Captain America, all have their own movies, and we had an introduction to Nick Fury, Mariah Hill, or however you pronounce her name, a quick glimpse of Hawkeye, and we got introduction of to Black Widow in standalone movies. That was cool. We all knew that at a certain point we all caught on that it was alluding to an Avengers film. The hype was real. The anticipation of an Avengers film, oh my lord. From Iron Man to Avengers, that was leading into Avengers. Like, those 4 years was, oh my lord. It was a really exciting time being a comic book fan. Now when we saw like those heroes, the Avengers first teaming up, and then we saw that and them in New York just forming a little circle and having the camera spinning around them, right? It was, oh my lord. At that time, it was like, yes! It was pretty much the final, like, it was like seeing the heroes at the end of Endgame, all the MCU heroes that led up, like, that we've seen, coming out of those portals. It was pretty much like that level of hype, you know? Before Marvel did that in Avengers Endgame. That was like, that was so cool. And then, don't get me started with the whole, when we saw like the heroes coming out of the portals, that was like, oh yes, that was awesome. So another thing is not getting ahead of themselves. On a similar note, one of the biggest issues with the DCEU, particularly the trilogy of films directed by Zack Snyder, is an excuse. It's an excess of foreshadowing. A Man of Steel, Snyder began planning a 4-film arc for Superman and the Justice League in addition to expected spin-offs like Wonder Woman, Batman vs Superman, and Snyder's Cut of Justice League are full of allusions to preemptive glimpse of the events of the later stories. However, the divisive response to Snyder's film and the chaotic behind-the-scenes history of the franchise eventually led to plans of the fourth and fifth film abandoned, so fans will likely never see these storylines conclude. I mean, I agree it's likely that we never see these stories conclude, but I think there's still a very, very small chance. Because Gunn says any story that takes place in outside of my DCEU is Elseworld. So technically, the Arrowverse, even though it had like Ezra Miller make a cameo in the Crisis crossover, is Elseworld, right? The Snyder Cut is pretty much going to be Elseworld. So like, we could get that fourth and fifth film. We could easily get us Man of Steel 2 that Henry Cavill so deserves. And it technically being an Elseworld, so there's that. So, low chances, sure, but it's still, it's still likely. What is the percentage of the likeliness? Not that high, but still, there's a little chance. Anyways. Trying to be optimistic here. Anyways. With a few exceptions, the middle of the minds behind the Arrowverse didn't think so far in advance. This caused its own problems at times, but it also meant that the series didn't waste time getting to the most romantic and satisfying stories. Oliver's transition from lethal vigilante to full-blown superhero was much quicker than expected. For example, the Flash solved its two biggest mysteries about the identity of the first Flash and who killed Barry Allen's mother within the first season. This tendency is to cut to the chase meant the writers had to continually come up with entirely new arcs for the characters, and while few of the stories were quite as compelling as the earliest ones, it also means that at the end of the franchise approach, there aren't nearly as many stories points being left unresolved in the DCEU as the DCEU has. I think because the Flash is supposed to disappear in 2024, at least that's what the newspaper says, but that was because of Crisis. Or is it 2023? I think it was 2023. But it could show us jump cut to 2024 and show us how Barry Allen disappeared. I mean, we still got what? Today's Thursday, and episode 2 of the CW Flash just came out yesterday. So we still got 11 episodes to see where Grant Gustin's Barry Allen will go. And the Arrowverse had many different tones, that's true. But I think it all with the exception of Batwoman, I think it complemented each other. Anyways, another common complaint viewers made about the DCEU, at least in its earliest years, that the films were tones were too dark. The Snyder movies were particularly bleak. The copious amount of death and destruction that made the rare glimmers of hope they depicted insignificant for many viewers. The Arrowverse series generally created more balanced tones. Arrow and the other vigilante focused series like Black Lightning and Batwoman were rather dark, but their dialogue were made infused with wit and humor, and characters like Felicity Smoke, played by Emily Bett Rickards, and Mary Hamilton played by Nicole Kane, further lighting the mood with their goofy presence. And I'm okay with like DC being the more dark ones. Like I was okay for the DCU to be dark because in my mind, Marvel is supposed to be the lighthearted one with hints of dark. DC is supposed to be dark with a hint of humor. So I was okay with it being dark. The Flash, Supergirl, and the Legends of Tomorrow were always much more lighthearted, thoroughly embracing the zany silliness that can be found in Silver Age superhero comics. And I love Legends of Tomorrow because they were lighthearted, and they knew that they were cheesy as hell, and they leaned into that. I was okay with that. I loved it. You can look at me crazy. I know a lot of you guys look at me crazy. Especially after watching me in my Ewok hot dog outfit. But hey, I'm owning that. I enjoy Legends of Tomorrow. I think that show deserves to wrap up properly, like The Flash is doing. But that's just me. Anyways, let's keep reading. The frequent crossovers between the series also did a good job of emphasizing these differences, while also blending the different tones to create seamless stories. Oliver and Barry's team-ups, for example, often focus on their different crime-fighting styles, with Oliver giving Barry tough love advice to make him more tactical and serious, while Barry questioned his friend and mentor's harsher strategies and encouraged him to lighten up. Superman's introduction. The franchise also differs sharply in regard to their light-hearted. Reread that. The franchise also differs sharply in regard to their handling of the character of Superman, particularly how he is introduced. Detractors of the Snyder films again cited that issues of tone, specifically arguing that the film are too dark to be proper adaptations of the Superman character. While the extent of which this is true is debatable, it's hard to argue against the fact that Civil, though no fault of his own, was not given an opportunity to portray Clark Kent or his alter ego in the aspirational figure that they were in the comics. Which is why it's a shame, which is why it's a shame that Henry Cavill's not getting Man of Steel 2. Because we could have got that. People who felt like we didn't get that in Man of Steel 1 could have easily got that in Man of Steel 2. And Man of Steel still should have and could have and definitely should be made. Even if it's considered as Elseworld, as Gunn says. Make Man of Steel 2 happen, because I think Henry Cavill deserves that, to be honest. The ethical and personal dilemmas the character faces in the trilogy, while interesting, prevented the story of creating the optimistic, joyful feelings usually associated with the character. The action sequence in Man of Steel, some of which were shown in, through a different perspective, Batman v Superman, were the targets of particular passionate criticism, with viewers reacting negatively to the destruction caused by Clark's battle with the evil Kryptonians like General Zod, played by Michael Shannon. The collapse of buildings and other urban structures during these scenes recalled 9/11 in a visual metaphor many found inappropriate as a result that were supposed to be filmed greatest depictions of Clark's heroism, instead wound up to be uncomfortable speculation. Okay? Yeah, you're okay. I mean, to be fair, that was his first real interaction. I mean, yeah, they had little fights in the movie, but that was the real first major boss to the metaphorical video game that Henry Cavill Superman had to face. It would be different if it was Man of Steel 2, if Man of Steel still happened, Superman should be more of a rounded hero, right? So by like Man of Steel 2, Superman should have his shit together. Let me get that out. Superman should have his shit together. Man of Steel 1, he is getting his shit together. And by Man of Steel 2, if it happened, we will have seen him in not only in Man of Steel, but Batman vs Superman, get killed, come back in Justice League, and with those three films, he has experienced some stuff, right? So with Man of Steel 2 coming along, that's where I can feel like that criticism can take into place. Because by this time, Superman should have his shit together. More of his shit together than he did in the Man of Steel 1 movie. Based off his experience in Batman vs. Superman and Justice League. And take your pick of which Justice League you want to get it from. The Snyder Cut or the theatrical version. The Arrowverse of Superman version of Superman, on the other hand, delivered those aforementioned positive feelings in spades. Clark was only referenced and shown in silhouette in Supergirl's first season, but the second season of the series received permission to use the character fully, and the creators made the most of the opportunity. Charlotte Hoechlin was casted and first appeared in a 2-episode storyline that started with the season 2 premiere and was a joy to watch from his first scene. His Clark had enough flaws and challenges to make him interesting, but also widely charming, and actually gets to enjoy the full fun of being a superhero. He places an emphasis on safeguarding civilians, even if it means the bad guys get away, and performs his rescue with a smile, often even stopping to converse with the people he meets after subduing a threat. Hoechlin's chemistry with Melissa Benoist, who played Supergirl, was also excellent, and the familial connection between the two characters added a ton of heart of all of Clark's appearances. Hoechlin's continued to impress when he played the role in the two of the Arrowverse annual crossovers, Crisis on Infinite Earths and Elseworlds. Hoechlin continued to impress especially after he was paired by Betsy Tulloch's Lois Lane. The on-screen couple popularity led them to receive their own standalone spin-off, Superman and Lois. The third season of which is upcoming. The series has received widespread praise and is considered by many to be the best Superman adaptation of Superman ever. It's one of the best. I think that's just subjective, but it's definitely one of the best. I can say that for sure. The Arrowverse brought together a stronger team. And I think this is the last part, this last bit. Despite lengthy runtimes, the DCEU were never able to develop a memorable bond that various heroes have in the comics. As the titles implies, Batman and Superman spent most of their first film together, as at odds with one another, only coming together at the infamous Martha scene. I was tempted to say Martha. How do you know that name? But then remembered that Devo's over here sleeping. I did not want to wake him up. Sometimes sucks being a nerd. Sometimes sucks being a nerd. And whether one watches a theatrical version of the Justice League or Snyder's 4-hour version, one won't find any character dynamics as nuanced as those in Marvel's movies. For Marvel's Avengers movies, or for that matter, the ones that appear on the TV show. The greater numbers of crossovers gave the Arrowverse time to develop meaningful bonds between its main heroes. Oliver and Barry's relationship was the most complex and reassembled uh, the Batman Superman bond from the comics more closely than the actual movie version did. But Barry um also had a fun dynamic with Kara, and the latter quickly formed a connection with Kate Kane's version of Batwoman being played by Ruby Rose. The original cast of Legends of Tomorrow was made up of supporting characters from The Flash and Arrow, so most of the team was well developed relationships with the other leads. Exploring the long lasting connections gave the crossovers their emotional spark and made events like Oliver's death in Crisis on Infinite Earths much more impactful. And I agree. I the DCEU had like potential, just didn't take upon it as much as it should have. MCU from Iron Man 1 to Avengers Endgame for the most part has been great. I just Iron Man 1 to Spider-Man No Way Home has been mostly great. And well, yeah, you can't even bring Doctor Strange Multiverse to Madness, but I think the reason why I mentioned Spider-Man as the last, because that was the last movie that really like wowed me, and as a Marvel fan, and I absolutely loved the I absolutely loved No Way Home. It was a beautifully made movie. That was the last Marvel movie that I can say I really loved. If that makes sense. I don't know why my voice got deep. But yeah, I think James Gunn should look at like what didn't work for the DCEU, what worked for the Arrowverse, and blend it together. With this announcement, I'm not too like I'm not as excited for it as I would like to. But I think Gunn should like has a lot of material to look back on. What made the DCU not work before? What were their strengths? What were the strengths of the Arrowverse? What was their weaknesses? And definitely apply them. Sure. What worked for the Dark Knight trilogy? What didn't work for the Dark Knight trilogy? And then look at some areas where why the MCU succeeded. Don't copy the lighthearted tone too much. Let Marvel keep being lighthearted. Draw upon that darkness while have your comedic timing. And I can tell you, James Gunn's DCEU could potentially be one of the most or the best cinematic universes of all time. So James Gunn and Peter Safran has like a lot of resources they can use to as study guides of what to do and what not to do. And I do pray everything works for the DCEU because I want this thing to succeed. I feel bad for DC. I want this thing to succeed. And I'm a comic book bluff. My favorite DC character has to be the Green Arrow, while my favorite Marvel character has to be Peter Parker Spider-Man. Then comes like T'Challa, Black Panther. But what do you beautiful people have to say about this? Let me know in the comments section down below. Love you guys. Have a wonderful day. Be kind to one another. I agree with something like a lot of these points, but I want to know what you guys feel. Let me know in the comment section. Love you all. Have a wonderful day. Be kind to one another. And we'll talk to you beautiful people later. Later, taters.